Consider this: millions of dollars earmarked for vital development projects in low-income nations now sit idle. Not in some obscure account, but within the coffers of the United States Agency for International Development. This isn't American money, mind you. These are funds contributed by three steadfast European allies, Sweden, Norway, and the Netherlands, a combined sum of $15 million entrusted to USAID for joint initiatives. For months, this money has been, to use the bureaucratic term, parked. Then came the shift in Washington. A new administration took hold, accompanied by a pronounced drive for fiscal austerity. The emphasis turned sharply inward towards what was termed government efficiency. Programs were scrutinized, budgets were slashed, and USAID felt the sharp edge of these cuts. Predictably, our European partners, seeing this dramatic change in direction and the sudden silence from Washington, did what any prudent actor would. They inquired. They asked a simple question: what has become of our funds? Will they be used as intended, or will they be returned? To date, the response has been nothing. Silence. This silence is not just bureaucratic inertia, it speaks to a deeper operational reality, one we must now examine with precision. The genesis of this silence, this operational freeze, can be traced directly to policy shifts within Washington. The arrival of a new administration on January 20th triggered an immediate, system-wide funding halt. This wasn't merely a procedural delay, it was a deliberate recalibration of priorities. Coupled with this administrative change was the ascendance of a particular philosophy, one emphasizing drastic reductions in government spending, often framed under the banner of efficiency. Figures associated with this drive and concepts like this Department of Government Efficiency, though perhaps loosely defined in formal terms, exerted considerable influence. The effect was tangible. USAID, an agency already tasked with complex international operations, found itself facing significant budgetary constraints. Funding lines were curtailed, programs were placed under review, and the overall scope of its activities contracted sharply. This internal restructuring within USAID had immediate external consequences. The European contributions, intended for projects now potentially deemed non-priority or simply unfunded under the new fiscal regime, became collateral. The inquiries from Stockholm, Oslo, and The Hague were not born of mere curiosity. They were a direct and logical response to the operational opacity emanating from Washington. Having entrusted funds in good faith, based on established agreements and shared objectives, these nations were now confronted with an unexpected silence. This absence of communication isn't just discourteous, it's operationally unsound. It creates uncertainty, not only for the contributing governments but crucially for the very organizations on the ground tasked with implementing these development projects. Consider the practical implications. These are not abstract sums on a ledger. These funds represent planned activities, committed resources, and the livelihoods of individuals and organizations in low-income countries. The Swedish spokeswoman, Julia Lindholm, articulated this precisely when she spoke of the concern for partner organizations. These are entities that have likely already invested time, personnel, and resources in preparing for projects that now hang in limbo. If these funds are not dispersed, these organizations face potential financial strain, jeopardizing the very development goals these joint initiatives were designed to achieve. This operational disruption at the tactical level then cascades upwards, impacting the strategic landscape of transatlantic relations. The question is no longer simply about $15 million. It's about something far more significant. It is tempting to view this purely as a bureaucratic entanglement, a mere accounting discrepancy. To do so, however, would be a critical miscalculation. Imagine for a moment the expected operational paradigm. Allied nations, sharing common objectives in global development, pool resources in a collaborative effort. Funds are entrusted, projects are planned, and implementation proceeds based on mutual understanding and transparent communication. This is the idealized scenario, the foundation upon which international partnerships are ostensibly built. Yet the reality unfolding before us presents a starkly contrasting picture. Instead of collaboration, we see unilateral action. Instead of transparency, we encounter opacity. Instead of partnership, we are witnessing, arguably, a form of financial disregard. The European allies are not demanding handouts, they are seeking accountability for funds they contributed. This is not about seeking new aid, it's about reclaiming what is rightfully theirs, funds earmarked for specific, agreed-upon purposes. The silence from USAID, therefore, is not simply a communication failure. It is an operational signal, broadcasting a message that resonates far beyond the immediate financial figures. It suggests a potential shift in the perceived value of allied contributions, a possible reevaluation of transatlantic partnerships in Washington. This episode, seemingly minor in isolation, must be understood within a larger context of evolving power dynamics. When a major power like the United States unilaterally alters its financial commitments and neglects to even acknowledge inquiries from its allies, it raises fundamental questions about the nature of these alliances. Is it a partnership of equals based on mutual respect and shared interests? Or is it becoming a more asymmetrical relationship, where the priorities of the dominant power overshadow the concerns and contributions of its partners? The implications extend beyond the immediate financial dispute. At stake is the very currency of international relations, trust. And trust, once eroded, is notoriously difficult to rebuild. Beneath the surface of this financial standoff lies a more profound question. What does this incident reveal about the evolving strategic calculus within Washington? The drive for government efficiency, while presented as a fiscally responsible measure, can also be interpreted as a reprioritization of resources, a shift away from certain forms of international engagement. Development aid, often viewed as a soft power tool, may be perceived as less critical in an environment increasingly focused on immediate, tangible returns and perhaps a more transactional approach to international relations. The silence from USAID in this context is not merely administrative oversight. It could signify a deliberate strategic choice, a tacit signal that allied concerns regarding development funding are no longer paramount. Examining the timeline is crucial. The funding freeze coinciding with the new administration's arrival suggests a direct causal link. The subsequent lack of response to European inquiries reinforces this interpretation. It indicates a systemic issue, not an isolated bureaucratic lapse. This situation compels us to consider the potential long-term consequences. If allied contributions are treated with such apparent disregard, what incentive remains for future joint initiatives? Will European nations continue to entrust funds to US-led programs if there is a perceived risk of unilateral redirection, or, at minimum, a lack of transparency and accountability? The answer, logically, is likely to be no. This incident may well serve as a catalyst, prompting European allies to reassess their funding mechanisms, to diversify their partnerships, and perhaps to pursue development agendas more independently of Washington's orbit. The immediate financial sum in question, $15 million, is relatively modest on the international scale. However, the operational implications of this episode are far from insignificant. They touch upon the very foundations of transatlantic trust and the future architecture of international cooperation. This seemingly localized financial dispute, therefore, transcends the immediate figures and enters the realm of broader geopolitical currents. The ramifications extend far beyond the $15 million currently in limbo. This incident serves as a microcosm, reflecting potentially larger shifts in the transatlantic relationship and the operational dynamics of international cooperation. Consider the message this sends to other allies, beyond just Sweden, Norway, and the Netherlands. If established financial commitments can be unilaterally frozen and inquiries met with silence, what confidence can be placed in broader agreements, in shared strategic objectives? The erosion of trust, even in seemingly technical domains like development funding, can have cascading effects across the entire spectrum of alliance cooperation, from security to diplomacy. This situation also invites a broader reflection on the evolving landscape of international development itself. If traditional channels, heavily reliant on U.S. agencies, become perceived as unreliable or opaque, alternative structures will inevitably emerge. European nations, with their own established development expertise and resources, may increasingly seek to forge independent paths or strengthen collaborations outside of the U.S. orbit. This could lead to a fragmentation of international development efforts, potentially reducing overall effectiveness and creating new geopolitical fault lines. Finally, and perhaps most significantly, this episode underscores a potential trend towards unilateralism in U.S. foreign policy decision-making. The lack of consultation, the absence of communication, and the apparent disregard for allied concerns point towards a prioritization of domestic policy shifts over the maintenance of established international partnerships. In conclusion, while the immediate issue is the repatriation of unspent funds, the underlying strategic reality is far more consequential. This seemingly minor financial impasse reveals a potentially significant inflection point in transatlantic relations, with implications that could resonate for years to come, shaping the future of international cooperation and the very nature of alliances in a rapidly evolving global landscape. Therefore, we are left with a stark and unavoidable reality. This is not merely about the recovery of $15 million. It is about the recovery of something far more valuable and far more easily lost: confidence. The silence emanating from Washington is not just an absence of response, it is a form of communication in itself, one that speaks volumes about shifting priorities and evolving perceptions of partnership. What began as a practical matter of unspent funds has become a litmus test for the health of transatlantic relations, a tangible manifestation of deeper currents reshaping the international order. Unless this silence is broken, unless transparency and accountability are restored, we risk not just a financial impasse, but a strategic fracture, one that will reverberate far beyond the immediate balance sheets, impacting the very architecture of cooperation upon which stability and shared progress depend. The question now is not simply whether these funds will be returned, but what this entire episode reveals about the future of alliance itself and the foundations upon which we intend to build it. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this analysis, and be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more geopolitical insights like this. I love hearing your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. Share this video with anyone interested in deeper perspectives on current events. Until next time, stay informed and think critically. Thank you.